In the last episode, we primed and painted the engine, pulleys, and accessory brackets. Now we'll bring it all together by finishing things off with VHT Wrinkle Plus. Next up on the Camino project, it's painting these valve covers, timing chain cover, and oil pan with VHT's Wrinkle Plus. The engine block was done, so moving on to the next step. So of course the easier thing to do here is remove the valve covers, oil pan, and the timing chain cover, because it's a whole lot easier to do this on the table versus masking everything off while it's still on the engine. Whoa! Still got a little bit of oil on it. This valve cover has an existing finish on it, and the first thing we have to do is prep it. I'm going to start with Dupli-Color paint stripper. Alright, the paint stripper did a great job here. You can see these valve covers are all good and clean. I went ahead and scuffed this one down with the red Scotch-Brite pad, and what I'm going to do now is do the same to this valve cover. You can see some rust here, and also the chrome is still bright and shiny. We want this good and scratched up so the paint has something to bite into, that mechanical adhesion. Once this is all good and sanded down, I'll hit it again with the prep spray, let it dry, blow it off, and we'll be good to go. Alright, so these valve covers are prepped, dry, sanded, prepped again, and good to go. So the next step is applying the VHT Wrinkle Plus. Now, applying this product is a little bit different than most other paints, considering the fact that it does wrinkle. Now, it wrinkles relying on each additional coat. It also relies on how heavy the coats are as well. Now, we recommend 3 good heavy coats, consistent throughout, because the better the coverage is, the better and more consistently it's going to wrinkle throughout as well. So I'm going to start with 1 very light coat just for that tack coat, and then I'm going to follow with 3 heavy, consistent coats. Now this paint does take some time to dry, approximately 2 hours to dry, to air dry. That will allow the wrinkling to happen. Now, to help enhance and speed up the wrinkling and help the consistency of it, besides good heavy coverage, or good even coverage I should say, is using a heat gun, which we're going to get to as well. So let me shake up this can a little bit more. We'll lay down the first tack coat, followed by 3 heavy coats. Alright, Mark and I finished up these valve covers with the VHT Wrinkle Plus, and they really came out nice. So the next step is the timing chain cover, the oil pan. We have sitting over here. Both Mark and I prepped these up. We primed them with the Dupli-Color engine primer, just to even things all out, just because they're rusty, has some old paint on them. So this is good and dry, and we're going to go ahead and hit the VHT Wrinkle Plus right now. 3 good coats, about 10 minutes in between coats. Let that dry, and then we'll hit that with the heat gun, just like we did on the valve covers, and get that good, consistent wrinkle finish. So we're starting with a fairly light coat, a little bit medium. You want to make sure each coat, after the first coat, is good and wet, not to the point where it's going to run, but the way this paint works is it works off of each additional coat that you put on there. And on the instructions, we recommend 3 medium to heavy coats. And then we'll let that dry for about 20 or so. Hit it with the heat gun. Go ahead and let that wrinkle up. All right, we let the first coat dry for 5 minutes. Now we're ready for the second coat. Now the second coat here, you're going to want to have it pretty heavy, definitely not to the point where it's going to run. Followed by 5 minutes, Then by the third coat, same way. Good and heavy, not to the point where it's gonna run. You wanna make sure it is heavy and consistent all the way around because this paint relies on each coat. The more consistent the coverage, the better it's gonna wrinkle. All right, so I waited 5 minutes now after the second coat. This is a third coat, and again, make sure you keep it good and heavy and consistent. You don't want it running. After this, let it dry for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll hit it with the heat gun. You don't want to hit it with the heat gun too soon because you'll end up burning the paint. All right, we let this dry about 20 minutes. The finish is good and tacky. It's not too dry, so now is the perfect opportunity to put some heat to it. So what I'm gonna do now is start to heat this up. I definitely don't wanna burn it, so you don't wanna hold the gun too close. You don't want it too hot. Start in one corner, get that area good and hot. Once it starts to wrinkle, then you can just kind of work it all the way around the entire part consistently. So you can see right when it wrinkles. As soon as it starts to wrinkle, just follow it right along with the heat gun. Don't hold the heat gun in one spot too long, you'll end up burning the paint. You'll see exactly where it needs to go. All right, so these are actually looking really good and about done. So, we have these heat guns here, and if you don't have access to a heat gun, you're gonna wanna let it dry about 2 hours so it'll wrinkle on its own. Now, if the paint appears to be dry or will appear to be dry after 2 hours, and once it wrinkles like this, let it dry for 24 hours before you start to handle it and 48 hours before we put it together. So we're gonna let these sit here for a little while. We're gonna prep the engine, clean off the old gaskets, and then get these put back on the engine. In the next episode, while the engine is out, we continue our restoration of the El Camino. We clean up the engine bay, suspension, and frame, then we hit it all with VHT roll bar and chassis paint. To keep up on the latest from Dupli-Color, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and visit Dupli-Color.com. Make sure you hit that subscribe button for more great videos from Dupli-Color.